I don't even know where to start. My name is Emily, and I've been married to Tom for almost 5 years now. Things were great at first, like, really great. We had this perfect little bubble of a relationship. You know, the kind where everything feels like a fairy tale. We met in college, dated for a while, and then got married in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. The love we had felt real, and I genuinely thought we had something special. But that all started to change once we got married, and it's all because of his mom, Linda. I don't even know what it is about me that rubs her the wrong way, but from the start, she made it clear she wasn't a fan of me. I always chalked it up to being a little protective of her son, you know. But it's been way more than that. It's like she's actively trying to drive a wedge between us. The first red flag was when we moved into our new place. Tom and I had just bought a small house, and we were so excited. I wanted everything to be perfect, but the second Linda came over, it felt like I had stepped into some kind of war zone. She couldn't stop making little comments about how she missed Tom's old apartment, how everything in the house was too modern for her taste, and even how she thought Tom looked too skinny since we'd gotten married. I didn't take it too seriously at first. After all, mothers have their ways, right? But the more time went on, the more I started feeling like she wasn't just trying to bond with me or offer advice, she was actively trying to make me feel like I wasn't good enough for her precious son. It wasn't just the little comments either. Every time Tom and I made plans, Linda somehow found a way to get involved. It was like she couldn't stand the idea of him having a life outside of her. We tried to have date nights, but she'd call him constantly or show up unannounced. The worst part? Tom didn't see it. He'd just brush it off, like it was no big deal. And that's when I started feeling like I was fighting a losing battle. What the hell was I supposed to do when my own husband couldn't even see how toxic his mom was being? It didn't take long for things to escalate. At first, I tried to be patient with Linda. I really did. I told myself, she's his mom, she's just being protective. But that patience started to wear thin when she kept making these passive-aggressive remarks about me. It wasn't even about me directly at first, it was about everything I did, how I decorated the house, the food I cooked, even the way I dressed. One day, Tom and I had planned a weekend getaway to the lake. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, but guess who decided to call the night before we were set to leave? You guessed it, Linda. She had the nerve to say, "Are you sure you want to go? It's been so long since you and Tom had a chance to spend time with me." It was like she was guilt-tripping him into canceling on me, just so she could have more of his attention. Of course, Tom caved. He was all, "I'll just go check on her for an hour, and then we can go." And that's when I lost it. I felt like a damn afterthought in my own marriage. I told him that if he went, I wasn't going to stick around waiting for him. He could either spend the weekend with me, like we planned, or he could spend it with his mother. To his credit, he didn't go running to her right away, but the damage was already done. We argued for hours that night, me, feeling ignored and unimportant, and Tom, acting like he had no idea what the big deal was. I remember sitting there, fighting back tears, thinking about how everything had changed. The man I had fallen in love with seemed so distant now, like I was no longer a priority in his life. And that's when I really started to feel the weight of it all. The constant tension between me and Linda was tearing us apart. It wasn't just the little things anymore. It was everything. The emotional distance, the way she kept intruding, how Tom never stood up for me. That night, I realized something. I was fighting a battle I didn't sign up for. And Linda was winning. The breaking point came a couple of weeks later, when Linda decided to show up at our house uninvited. Tom and I had planned a quiet evening together, just a nice dinner, a movie, nothing fancy. But of course, Linda didn't think it was okay for her son to have a night to himself. She knocked on the door just as I was setting the table. "Surprise," she said, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thought I'd stop by and see how my baby is doing. I was beyond frustrated at this point. It wasn't even about her coming over, it was the fact that she thought it was okay to just show up whenever she felt like it, no consideration for me or my plans. I tried to stay calm. I really did. I told Tom to handle it, but of course, he was still in that "mom's always right" mindset, so he just let her in. I couldn't take it anymore. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room where she was already making herself comfortable on the couch. I didn't even wait for Tom to speak before I blurted out, "Linda, this has got to stop." Her eyebrows shot up in that way only a woman like her can do, like she's somehow above reproach. "What are you talking about, Emily?" "I'm talking about you always barging in, always making snide comments about everything I do, and trying to get in between Tom and me," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "It's getting ridiculous, and I'm done pretending it's not happening." Tom stood there, looking like he had no idea what was going on. Linda didn't even flinch. Instead, she just let out a long, exaggerated sigh. "Oh, Emily, you're being dramatic. You know I'm just concerned about my son. You're not even giving him space to breathe. Maybe if you weren't so controlling, he wouldn't feel the need to escape to me all the time." I stared at her, completely shocked by how she flipped the script. "Controlling? I'm trying to have a life with my husband, Linda. But you're constantly in the middle, throwing a wrench in everything." She didn't budge. "Tom is my son, Emily. He's the best thing that ever happened to you, and you're just going to let him slip away? Maybe you should think about that before you go accusing me of anything." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I felt a lump in my throat. I wasn't the one who was pushing him away, I wanted to scream. But what could I do? Tom just stood there, looking uncomfortable, like he was caught in the middle of something he didn't want to deal with. I finally turned to Tom, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're not even going to say anything?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom just doesn't know when to stop, Emily. You know how she is." I nodded, feeling my heart sink. This wasn't a conversation about Linda anymore. This was about me, feeling like an outsider in my own relationship. I looked at Linda one last time, then walked out of the room before either of them could say anything else. I didn't sleep that night. Not even close. I spent the whole evening replaying the conversation in my head, over and over again, until I was exhausted from thinking about it. I knew I should have been angry, but honestly, I just felt empty. It wasn't just Linda anymore, it was Tom, too. How could he stand there, saying nothing, while his mother twisted everything I said and made me feel like I was the problem? The next morning, I could feel the tension in the air. Tom barely looked at me when he got up to make coffee. We hadn't spoken much since the fight, and honestly, I wasn't sure where we stood anymore. I could hear Linda's voice in the back of my head, mocking me, telling me I was controlling and dramatic. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But how was I supposed to feel when every little thing I did seemed to irritate her? I tried to talk to Tom about it, but he kept brushing me off. "Mom's just not good with boundaries. You know how she is," he kept saying, like that was supposed to fix everything. But it didn't fix anything. I had tried to be understanding. I really had. But I wasn't a doormat. And I wasn't about to let Linda's presence continue to wreck my marriage. So, after a few days of avoiding each other and letting the silence build, I knew I needed to make a choice. Was I going to keep trying to be the perfect wife while Linda continued to chip away at my sanity? Or was I finally going to stand up for myself? I chose the latter. It wasn't about playing nice anymore, it was about respect. I needed to feel valued. I needed to feel like I mattered in this relationship. So, I sat down with Tom, took a deep breath, and said, "Tom, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired of always being the one who has to keep the peace. I'm tired of feeling like I'm invisible to you because your mom always gets her way. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's clearly not. Tom stared at me, his face a mixture of confusion and defensiveness. He wasn't ready to hear what I had to say. Emily, please don't do this. I don't want to fight. I'm just trying to keep everyone happy. Well, it's not working, I snapped. And I'm done. I can't keep pretending that you and your mom's toxic dynamic doesn't affect me. There was a long silence. Tom finally exhaled, a heavy sigh escaping from him like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. So what do you want from me, Emily? I shook my head. I want you to stand up for me. I want you to put me first for once. If you can't do that, then maybe we need to rethink what we're doing here. Tom didn't respond right away. He just stood there, looking lost and unsure. I couldn't tell if he was hearing me, or if he was just too afraid of confronting his mother to see the problem for what it was. The days after that conversation felt like walking on eggshells. Tom and I hardly spoke, and when we did, it was like I was talking to a stranger. He was distant, and I could feel the walls growing between us. It hurt more than I expected. I had never wanted to get to this point. All I wanted was for him to see that I wasn't the enemy, that I wasn't the one making all this drama. But it seemed like he was torn between me and his mom, like he couldn't pick a side. Then came the worst thing that could have happened. Linda showed up at our door again. This time, I wasn't going to back down. I had already told Tom how I felt, and I wasn't going to let his mom waltz in and make everything worse. She rang the doorbell, and Tom answered, just like always. I stayed back, hoping this time he'd handle it without me having to be involved. But of course, that wasn't going to happen. Linda waltzed in like she owned the place, all smiles and fake concern. I just wanted to see how my boy is doing, she said to Tom, then turned her eyes on me, her gaze cold. And Emily, dear, we need to talk. Tom didn't even give me a chance to speak before he said, Mom, we're kind of in the middle of something right now. Can't this wait? Linda just gave him a dismissive wave. Oh, it's important. I think you two need to hear what I have to say. I could feel my blood boiling. Tom had always been too nice to her, but I wasn't going to let her push me around anymore. I stood up and walked toward them, trying to keep my voice steady. No, Linda. I'm done. I've had enough. Tom's eyes widened. Emily, don't. Please, no, Tom. You need to hear this, I said, turning to face his mom. I'm not the problem here. I'm not the one trying to tear this family apart. But if you think I'm going to sit back while you manipulate your son into choosing you over me, you're sorely mistaken. Linda's face twisted in anger, her lips curling into a sneer. You think I'm manipulating him? You're the one trying to control him, Emily. You think you can come in here and change everything. Well, I've known Tom his whole life, and I'll be damned if I let you ruin him. That was it. The gloves were off. I couldn't believe how she was acting, how everything was always my fault in her eyes. You know what, Linda? Maybe you're right. Maybe you should have had a better say in who Tom married, because clearly, I'm not the woman you wanted for him. Tom's face flushed. This isn't helping, he muttered, but I could tell he was growing more frustrated with his mom than with me. He was tired of her constant interference, but he was still scared to confront her. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I'm done with this, Tom. I can't keep fighting for a marriage that feels like it's already over. If you want to keep letting your mom control everything, then I think you should really think about what that means for us. I turned to leave, my heart in my throat. I felt like I was suffocating, but I knew this was the only way forward. I couldn't keep trying to make things work if Tom wasn't willing to put me first, if he couldn't stand up to his mom and see how damaging she was to us. I left that day, but it wasn't easy. I spent hours driving around, not sure where to go, just needing space from everything. My mind was spinning. I kept replaying the words I'd said to Tom, thinking I might have overreacted. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I was being suffocated by Tom's mom's constant interference. I ended up at a friend's house, someone who had always been there for me. She didn't ask any questions when I showed up at her doorstep, looking like a wreck. I just collapsed on her couch, exhausted and mentally drained. The next few days were like a haze. I didn't hear from Tom, and that was both a relief and a heartbreak at the same time. I wasn't sure if he was giving me space or if he was just too busy dealing with his mother to care. The silence was deafening. I wanted him to reach out, but at the same time, I didn't want to be the one to make the first move anymore. Finally, after 3 days of radio silence, Tom called. I stared at my phone for a long time before answering. The moment I picked up, I could hear the tension in his voice. "Emily, we need to talk." "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. But I could feel the sting in my chest. It was hard to sound calm when everything felt like it was falling apart. "About what you said. And, about my mom." I didn't know whether to be relieved or pissed off that he was finally acknowledging it. "Okay, talk then." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he finally spoke again, his voice soft. "I know I've been distant. And I know I've been letting her get in the way of us. But I don't know what to do anymore, Emily. She's my mom. And she's never really liked anyone I've been with. I always thought it was just something I had to deal with." I felt a small glimmer of hope. At least he was finally admitting it, but it didn't erase the fact that he had never stood up for me before. "But you're right," he continued, "she's toxic. I've been letting her poison our relationship, and I didn't see it until now." "Great," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "But it's not just about seeing it, Tom. It's about doing something about it. If you keep letting her run the show, then what's the point of us?" He was quiet for a long time. It felt like he was weighing his options, like he was trying to decide if I was worth fighting for. Finally, he spoke up, his voice firm but unsure. "I don't want to lose you, Emily. But I need time. I need to figure out how to handle her without losing you in the process." "Time?" I repeated, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. "Tom, we've been doing this for years. You've been letting her get away with this for so long, and I don't know how much longer I can wait." "I get it," he said. "I'm not asking for forever. But please, give me a chance to fix this." I took a deep breath, staring out the window of my friend's house. "Okay. But this is the last time. If you can't stand up to her, I'm done." The next few days felt like a strange limbo. Tom didn't call me as much as I'd hoped, but I could feel the change in his attitude. There was a sense of urgency in the way he texted me, his words laced with apology and promises to do better. But words are just words, and I wasn't ready to let him off the hook just yet. I needed actions, not just empty promises. Then, one evening, Tom showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting it. I had almost convinced myself that maybe it was over, that the distance between us had grown too wide to bridge. But there he was, standing on my doorstep, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice shaky. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. There was no anger left in me, just a hollow exhaustion. I'd fought so hard to make things work, but now I was just tired. I wasn't sure I even had the energy to argue anymore. Tom sat down, looking at the floor, clearly conflicted. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about what she's doing to us. And I realized something. You're right. I've let my mom control everything for so long that I didn't even see it. I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping the peace, but all I've done is make things worse. And I've hurt you in the process." I swallowed hard, trying to hold back the tears. It wasn't that I was happy to hear him admit it, it was just that it felt like too little, too late. How many times had I told him this? How many times had I begged him to see what was happening? "But it's not just her," he continued, his voice cracking. "It's me too. I've been weak, Emily. I've let her get in the way of us. I've let her take over my life, and I've let you suffer because of it. And I hate myself for that." I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I married was sitting there, broken and vulnerable. But part of me wondered if I could even recognize him anymore. He'd allowed all this chaos, all this damage, to happen without doing anything to stop it. And now he was asking for another chance. "I don't want to be that person anymore," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "I don't want to lose you. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." There was a long silence. I couldn't decide if I was ready to believe him, or if I was just too tired to keep fighting. "You've hurt me, Tom," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "You've let her hurt me for so long. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep fighting for us when I feel like I'm the only one who cares." His eyes were filled with tears now, and I could see the guilt and regret in them. "I know. And I hate that I've made you feel that way. But I want to change. Please, just, give me a chance." I looked at him for a long time, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But my heart was still raw from all the hurt. "I don't know, Tom. I really don't know if I can trust you anymore." He took a deep breath and nodded. "I understand. But I'm not giving up on you. I'll prove it to you. I'll prove that I can be the man you deserve, the husband you deserve." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the only answer he had. And I realized, for the first time, that this was going to be a decision I had to make for myself. Did I believe him? Did I believe that he could really change, or was I just clinging to something that had already fallen apart? I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to process everything Tom had said. Part of me wanted to believe that he was sincere, that he truly wanted to change. But another part of me, the part that had been heard over and over again, couldn't shake the fear that this was just another empty promise, another round of words without any real follow-through. Tom called me every night, more frequently than usual, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. But each time I picked up the phone, I felt myself pulling back just a little more. He said he was working on standing up to his mom, that he was trying to figure out how to put us first, but I was tired of hearing the same things. I needed proof. I needed him to show me that he meant it. Linda, of course, wasn't making things any easier. She sent me passive-aggressive messages, things like, *, "You really think he's going to put you first over his own mother? You'll see." It was like she was always lurking in the background, trying to stir things up even when I thought I was starting to move forward. I couldn't avoid her forever, though. I knew that eventually, I would have to confront her again. The real breaking point came when Tom told me he was planning to have a family dinner, a dinner that included both of us, Linda included. I was hesitant. I wasn't ready to face her. But Tom kept insisting it was a step forward, that we could all sit down, talk things through, and hopefully find a way to move past the tension. I agreed, though part of me felt like I was walking into a lion's den. The night of the dinner came, and I dressed carefully. I didn't want to seem defeated, but I also didn't want to appear like I was fighting a battle I knew I'd already lost. When I walked into Tom's parents' house, Linda was there, looking as smug as ever. The table was set, the wine was poured, and everything looked normal. Like we were just another family having dinner together. Tom greeted me with a smile and a quick kiss on the cheek. He looked a little nervous, and I could tell he was walking on eggshells. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Linda sat across from me, a calculated smile on her face, but I could tell she was sizing me up, waiting for me to slip up. We all sat down, and at first, the conversation was awkward. Linda tried to make small talk, but her barbs were thinly veiled. She kept making little comments about how nice it was that Tom had found someone like me, so different from the other women he's been with. I wanted to snap at her, but I kept my mouth shut. It wasn't worth the fight. Not yet. At one point, Linda leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. "You know, Emily," she said, her voice sweet but laced with venom, "I've been thinking. If you and Tom really want this to work, you're going to have to learn to share him, you know? He's my son, and I'll always be part of his life. Maybe you should consider who really comes first." My heart sank. I could feel Tom's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd react. But before I could say anything, he spoke up, his voice firm and clear. "That's enough, Mom." The words hit me like a shockwave. Tom had never stood up to his mom like that. I looked over at him, my heart racing. Was this the change I'd been waiting for? Linda's face twisted in disbelief. "What did you say?" I said, "That's enough," Tom repeated. "You don't get to talk like that anymore. Emily is my wife, and she deserves respect. We deserve respect. And if you can't give her that, then I need some space from you." The room fell into complete silence. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my stomach in knots. I didn't know if I was more shocked by what Tom said or by the realization that, for the first time, he was really choosing me. Linda was staring at him, her mouth open in shock, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. For a long time, no one spoke. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, Linda stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Fine. You want to choose her? Go ahead. But don't come crying to me when it all falls apart." She stormed out of the room, leaving us in the awkward silence that followed. I didn't know whether to cry, laugh, or just sit there, stunned by the sudden shift in the power dynamics. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Tom had done it. He had stood up to his mom for me. The silence that followed Linda's dramatic exit was deafening. I sat there, trying to process what had just happened. Tom was still sitting across from me, his eyes wide, his hands resting on the table as if he wasn't sure what to do next. He finally broke the silence, his voice shaky but full of determination. "Emily. I don't know what to say. I didn't expect it to be that bad, but I couldn't let her keep doing this to us. I've been so scared to stand up to her, to lose her, but I realized, I'm already losing you." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. My heart was racing, but in a way that felt more like relief than anything else. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Tom finally picked me over his mother. It was a step toward rebuilding, a step toward us being a team instead of a dysfunctional family caught in a tug-of-war. "I didn't think you'd do it, Tom," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I didn't think you'd actually choose me. After everything, after all these years of watching you let her tear us apart, I didn't think you'd have it in you." Tom looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and sincerity. "I'm sorry, Emily. I should have done this a long time ago. I was weak, and I let her get between us. But I'm done with that now. You're the most important person in my life. And I'm not going to let anyone, take you away from me." I could feel my walls starting to crumble. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was real. The words were finally matching the actions, and that made all the difference. "I appreciate that, I really do," I said, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. "But this isn't going to be easy, you know? We're not just going to magically fix everything because you stood up to her once. You've been letting her control everything for years. It's going to take time to trust that this is the real change. Tom nodded, his expression soft but full of resolve. I know. And I'll do whatever it takes, Emily. I'll fight for us, I promise. Later that evening, I left his parents' house with a mix of emotions. Part of me felt lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my chest, but another part of me was still wary. Linda's reaction, her insults, her complete refusal to accept any boundaries, those things weren't going to disappear overnight. But what mattered most was that Tom had shown me that he could change, that he could finally see what I had been fighting for all these years. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this battle. We were in it together. The days that followed weren't without their struggles. Linda didn't make it easy on us. She sent texts, emails, even tried to show up unannounced at our house. But every time, Tom was there, standing beside me, refusing to let her manipulate or control us any longer. It felt empowering, but it was also exhausting. The emotional toll was real. Every time she tried to push back, we had to push harder. But with each victory, even the small ones, I could feel our bond strengthening. One night, after a particularly difficult conversation with Linda, Tom and I sat on the couch together, just holding each other. You were right, he said quietly, breaking the silence. This isn't going to be easy. I didn't realize how much damage I'd done. But I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make things right. I didn't say anything. I just kissed him. Because in that moment, I believed him. For the first time, I felt like we could actually make it. The weeks that followed felt like a roller coaster. On one hand, things with Tom were better. He was more present, more attentive, and it was like I could finally breathe again, knowing that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. But on the other hand, Linda was relentless. The emotional toll of dealing with her was taking a lot out of me. She kept showing up, uninvited, and sometimes, I wondered if she was testing our resolve. I could tell Tom was frustrated with his mom's behavior, but he was determined to stick to his word. He'd tell her things like, "Mom, I've told you, I'm not going to keep making excuses for you anymore," and, "I'm not going to let you tear us apart anymore, and I need you to understand that." It was a slow, painful process, but I could see that Tom was starting to mean what he said. There was one particular incident that really tested us. It was a Saturday afternoon when I got the text. It was from Linda, and it was one of those passive-aggressive messages she loved to send when she wanted to get under my skin. She wrote, "I think Tom made a huge mistake. He's too good for you. He deserves someone who will actually care about his family." I showed it to Tom, and his face went pale. For a moment, I thought he was going to crumble under the pressure. But instead, he stood up and walked over to the kitchen counter, pacing back and forth. "I can't believe she's still doing this. I'm trying so hard, and she just won't stop," he muttered. His frustration was palpable, and I knew this was going to be a breaking point for both of us. "I'm so tired of her trying to manipulate us," I said, the weight of it all settling deep in my chest. "I just want her to leave us alone. I want her to respect us. But she never will. She doesn't care about you, Tom. She only cares about controlling you." Tom stopped pacing and turned to look at me. There was fire in his eyes, a determination I hadn't seen before. "You're right. And I'm done. I'm not going to let her control our lives anymore. I'm choosing you, Emily. This is it." The words felt like a promise, one that I'd been waiting years to hear. But even with Tom's renewed commitment, the test wasn't over. That weekend, we planned to visit his parents for a family gathering. I wasn't exactly thrilled about it, especially with everything that had happened, but Tom insisted it would be a step toward repairing things with his mom. I agreed, but I was nervous. When we arrived, Linda was already there, looking as cold and calculating as ever. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me, but this time, she didn't say anything. We all sat down at the table, the air heavy with tension. For the first time, I felt a shift. It wasn't the same silence that filled the room before, the uncomfortable quiet that made me want to run. This time, there was an unspoken understanding. Tom was no longer going to let her have the power she once did. And to my surprise, Tom handled it perfectly. Every time Linda made a snide remark or tried to throw in a jab, Tom was quick to shut it down. He didn't let her control the conversation. And I could see her starting to lose her grip, her smug expression fading with every moment. At one point, she snapped, "You can't keep this up, Tom. You're going to regret it." But he didn't flinch. He just looked at her, his voice steady, "No, Mom. I won't. I'm not going to let you tear this apart. Not again." And in that moment, I realized something: we were winning. Slowly, but we were winning. After that dinner, things with Linda shifted in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big confrontation, no epic moment of clarity. But there was a change in the air, something subtle yet undeniable. I could feel it in the way Tom stood taller, in the way he didn't hesitate to make decisions anymore, in the way he looked at me like he was finally seeing me as his partner, not as a secondary character in his mom's drama. I thought the worst was behind us, that the constant battle with Linda was something we'd eventually outgrow. But there was one more test I wasn't prepared for. One last gut punch that would shake everything I thought I knew about our relationship. It came a few weeks later, a random Thursday evening when Tom and I were lounging on the couch, enjoying a rare moment of peace. I had just started to believe that we could make this work, that maybe we were actually building something real. That's when the phone rang. Tom glanced at the caller ID. It was his mom. He let it ring twice before he answered. I could feel my pulse quicken. The tension between Tom and Linda had been simmering, but I didn't expect her to call him out of the blue, especially after everything that had happened. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes as he answered the phone. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice calm but guarded. "What's up?" I watched as his expression shifted from casual to confused, and then to a strange mix of anger and disbelief. I couldn't hear what Linda was saying, but it was clear from Tom's reaction that whatever it was bad. After a few moments, he ended the call abruptly. He stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he ran them through his hair. I don't even know what to say." "Tom?" I asked, anxiety creeping into my voice. "What happened? What did she say?" His face was pale. She told me she's been talking to some woman. A woman who used to be my wife." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Used to be my wife, I couldn't process it at first. There was no way. Wait, what? What does that even mean? My voice cracked as I spoke. Is she talking about you and someone else? Tom shook his head. No. It's someone from my past. Someone I dated before we even met. Apparently, she thinks it would be better for me to be with her again. That she's more suited for me. It's insane. I could feel my chest tighten as the realization set in. Linda had done it again. She was manipulating him, trying to put doubt in his mind, trying to convince him that maybe I wasn't the right one after all. I had thought we were past all this, that things were starting to heal. But Linda had found another way to worm her way into our lives. "Tom," I said, my voice firm, "you don't need to entertain this. You know she's just trying to control you. You've already told her where we stand." He nodded, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. I know. But hearing her talk like that, it just makes me question everything. I mean, how does she even know about this woman? Why would she bring it up now? I didn't have an answer for him. All I knew was that Linda had crossed a line, and it was up to Tom to decide once and for all if he was going to stand by me, or if he was going to let her pull him back into that toxic cycle. "Tom," I said, trying to steady my voice, "I'm not going anywhere. You need to make a choice here. You know what your mom's capable of. You've seen how she manipulates and controls everything. If you're going to keep putting her first, then we're not going to make it. I need you to choose me. I need you to choose us." He didn't respond at first, his eyes searching my face like he was trying to figure out if I was serious. And then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I choose you," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm done. This ends here. I've let her control my life for too long, and I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not letting her tear us apart." I couldn't believe it. For the first time in years, I believed him. The pain, the uncertainty, the fear, it all melted away in that moment. Tom was choosing me. He was finally taking control of his life. The following days were a blur. Tom's decision to cut his mother out of his life, for real this time, set off a chain reaction. It wasn't just the relief I felt that day, there was something even bigger hanging in the air now. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, but also an undeniable tension. Tom had made a bold choice, but it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be some neat, clean break. Linda wasn't just going to walk away quietly. She had never been the type to back down, not when she felt her control slipping. I knew this was going to be the hardest part, the aftermath. Tom and I had no idea just how far she'd go. The first real test came when Linda showed up at our door, unannounced, just a few days after Tom had cut ties with her. I was in the middle of making dinner when the doorbell rang. I looked at Tom, who was sitting on the couch, his expression unreadable. "I'll get it," I said, my voice a little too sharp. Tom didn't say anything, but I could feel the tension between us. He wasn't ready to deal with her yet, and frankly, neither was I. But this wasn't something we could ignore anymore. I opened the door, and there she was, Linda, looking as icy as ever. She didn't say a word at first, just stood there, glaring at me. For a moment, I considered closing the door on her, telling her she wasn't welcome. But Tom had made it clear that we needed to face this together. "Mom," Tom said from behind me, his voice steady but firm. "What do you want?" Linda didn't even look at him. She was laser-focused on me, like I was the cause of all her problems. "I just wanted to see if your wife's done poisoning you yet," she sneered. "Or is she still trying to ruin everything?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like a switch had flipped, and all that venom she'd kept simmering beneath the surface was now bubbling over. But Tom wasn't having it. He stepped forward, cutting her off. "Enough, Mom. I've told you, I'm not listening to this anymore. I'm done with your drama. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. I'm not going to let you ruin my life, or my marriage." Linda's eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. She took a step back, trying to regain control, but Tom was unrelenting. "I don't care if you're upset. I don't care if you're disappointed. What matters is that I'm choosing Emily, and that's final." The look on her face was something I'll never forget. It was a mix of disbelief, rage, and, for a split second, hurt. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me felt sorry for her, but honestly, most of me felt triumphant. She'd pushed us to this point. She'd tried to tear us apart for years. And now? Now it was over. She turned on her heel and stormed off, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, it was done. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. There was an eerie sense of calm that hung between Tom and me. It was like the storm had passed, but the damage it left behind was still fresh, still there, hanging in the air. We both knew that Linda wasn't going to give up that easily. She'd retreat for a while, but we knew she'd be back. And when she came back, it wouldn't be the same as before. But there was something different this time. We were a team. We were ready for whatever she threw our way. The emotional toll was still there, lingering under the surface, but Tom and I were talking more openly about everything. We were building something that felt real, something I hadn't dared to believe could exist. The trust we'd been slowly rebuilding was finally taking root. I wasn't holding my breath for a perfect future, but I could see a future, and that was enough. One evening, a few days after Linda's visit, Tom turned to me as we sat in our living room, the quiet hum of the evening around us. "You know," he said, his voice soft but sure, "I didn't realize how much she'd affected me until now. I didn't know how much I let her control me." I looked at him, my heart swelling. "It's not your fault. She's been manipulating you for years. But you did what you needed to do, Tom. You chose us." He smiled at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a real smile. Not forced, not apologetic, but a smile of someone who knew he had made the right decision. "I did," he said, his eyes locking with mine. "And I'll keep choosing you, Emily. Every single day." In the days following that final confrontation with Linda, things settled into an almost eerie calm. Tom and I went about our daily lives, adjusting to this new reality where, for the first time, there wasn't this invisible force trying to pull us apart. But that didn't mean everything was back to normal. Not by a long shot. I could see the weight still pressing down on Tom. He was quieter than usual, and I could tell he was wrestling with a storm of his own. It was one thing to stand up to his mom, but it was another to face the aftermath of years of manipulation. And honestly, I didn't know how to help him. There were still moments when he'd get distant, like he was caught in his own thoughts. I wasn't the only one who noticed. One evening, we were sitting at dinner when Tom's best friend, Jake, called. I could see the hesitation on Tom's face as he picked up the phone. I knew something was coming. Tom hadn't really talked to Jake about the situation with his mom, not in detail. They'd always been close, but I figured Tom didn't want to burden him with the drama. But after the call, Tom hung up, looking like he'd been sucker punched. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, though I could see the anxiety in his eyes. Tom sighed, running a hand over his face. "Yeah, Jake, he's pissed. He says I should have kicked her out of my life years ago. He's mad I let it go on this long." I blinked in surprise. "But, you did what you had to do. You can't undo the past. You can only move forward." "I know," he replied, his voice tight. "But he's right. I should have seen it sooner. I should have made this choice years ago." I reached over and put a hand on his. "You can't change the past, Tom. But you've done what's right now. You're moving forward. We're moving forward." He nodded, though I could see he was still lost in his thoughts. It was a lot for him to process. He'd spent so many years trying to keep the peace with Linda, trying to make everyone happy, but in the end, all that had done was hurt him, and us. The next day, he received a letter from his mother. I could feel the tension in the air the moment he opened it. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he read the words. It was a manipulative mess, apologies mixed with guilt trips, offering to make amends but also throwing in thinly veiled accusations about me being the source of all her problems. She even wrote that she was willing to forgive him if he came to his senses and left me. I watched Tom read the letter and felt my heart sink. Part of me wanted to rip it up, throw it away, tell him not to read it. But I knew it was something he had to process himself. He had to see for himself just how far Linda would go. "I don't even know what to say about this," he muttered, the letter crumpling slightly in his hands. "She's still trying to pull me back in." I felt a pang of frustration. "You've made your decision, Tom. Don't let her do this to you. Don't let her take you back into that world." "I know," he said, his voice heavy. But it's hard. She's my mom. I'm supposed to be the one to take care of her. I'm not supposed to be the one she's pushing away. Your mom doesn't get to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself, Tom. You've been through enough. We've been through enough. He nodded, but I could see the conflict still lingering. It wasn't as easy as just turning his back on her, not after all these years of trying to do right by her, even when she didn't deserve it. But over time, he started to make his peace with it. The more Linda tried to insert herself into our lives, the more Tom realized how much healthier it was for both of us to keep her at a distance. It wasn't just about protecting our marriage, it was about protecting his own mental health and happiness. Still, it wasn't easy. It felt like the deeper we dug into the relationship we were rebuilding, the more Linda's shadow loomed over us. She wasn't letting go without a fight. One evening, after a particularly rough conversation with his mom, one where she accused him of abandoning her and not caring about his family, Tom just collapsed on the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I'm so tired of this," he said, his voice muffled. "I don't want to keep fighting. I just want to live my life, Emily." "I know, babe," I said softly, rubbing his back. "But you are living your life. And you're doing it the right way. This is about you, about us. It's not about her anymore." Tom looked up at me, his eyes tired but determined. "You're right. I just wish I'd done this sooner." "Better late than never," I replied, smiling weakly. "We're getting through it, and we'll get through it together." And in that moment, I knew. I knew we were going to make it. Despite everything, we were stronger than we'd ever been. Together, we could face whatever Linda threw our way. It was a few weeks after that night, after Tom's emotional breakdown, that we hit the breaking point with Linda. Honestly, I had hoped that after everything, she'd get the hint and back off. But Linda was nothing if not persistent. She didn't know the meaning of the word boundaries. And by now, I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for things to blow over. One Sunday afternoon, while we were out running errands, we got back to the house to find a message waiting for us. It was from Linda, of course. And it wasn't a simple, "I'm sorry," or "Can we talk?" No, it was a full-blown attack on our relationship. She had somehow found my social media accounts, something I'd kept private, and was now spreading lies. The message was an accusation, saying that I was manipulating Tom, controlling him, and turning him against her. She painted me as some sort of villain, calling me toxic and dangerous for his mental health. It was the same old script, but this time, it hit harder. This time, I could see how deep her influence still ran in his life. Tom stood in the kitchen, staring at his phone, his jaw clenched. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel his anger building. "She's doing it again," he said, his voice low and controlled. "She's twisting everything, trying to make me feel like I'm the one screwing this up." I walked over to him, standing close, trying to offer support without saying anything. He needed to process this on his own, and I knew the best thing I could do was just be there. "She's not going to win," I said softly, my hand on his back. "We've made it through everything so far. We're not going back to that." Tom didn't respond right away, his eyes glued to the screen. But finally, after a long pause, he put the phone down, letting out a heavy sigh. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Emily. I don't know how to fight this anymore." His voice cracked, and I knew this was the hardest part for him. It wasn't just about me, it was about his entire family, about the years of conditioning and guilt that Linda had placed on him. And now, it was all coming to a head. "Tom," I said, my voice steady, "you don't have to fight alone. I'm right here with you. You've already made the hard choice. You've already chosen me. I'm not going anywhere." But even as I said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't want to lose his mom. He didn't want to feel like the bad guy. I could hear the self-doubt creeping in. Maybe I'm the one who's messing things up, he murmured. Maybe I should just go over there, talk to her. Maybe I'll make things right. I shook my head firmly. You've tried that, Tom. You've bent over backward for her for years. You've done more than enough. You don't owe her any more of your time or your energy. But even I wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. Linda wasn't just going to walk away, not without making sure Tom felt the weight of her absence in every way possible. It was a week later when Linda showed up at our doorstep again. This time, she wasn't calling or sending messages, she was standing on our porch, looking determined, like she had come to finish what she'd started. Tom was the one who answered the door, but I stood close behind him, my hand on his arm, ready for whatever was about to come. "Mom," Tom said coldly, his voice a sharp contrast to the way it used to be. "What do you want now?" Linda didn't mince words. "I've had enough of this," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just shut me out of your life? You think she is more important than your own mother?" Tom's expression hardened. "I don't think anything. I know it. I've made my choice, and I'm not going back on it. You're toxic, Linda. You've manipulated me for years, and I won't let you do it anymore." I could see Linda's face twist with anger, her fists clenched at her sides. "You've lost your mind, Tom. You've turned your back on your own blood for that woman. You'll regret this. I will make sure of it." Her words stung, but Tom stood firm. He didn't flinch, didn't back down. He looked at her with a calmness that surprised me, like he had finally seen through all her games. "You've already tried to ruin my life for years," he said, his voice low and steady. "And you know what? It's not going to work anymore. I'm not your pawn, Linda. I'm not playing by your rules." Linda's face turned red, and I honestly thought she might explode right there. But instead, she stood there, seething, and after a long pause, she turned and walked away, not saying another word. Tom and I stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. "That was it," Tom said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I finally told her. I don't know if I'm relieved or if I feel like I've just made the biggest mistake of my life." I put my hand on his shoulder, pulling him into a gentle embrace. "You made the right choice. We're finally free from all this, Tom. This is it." He held me tight, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. It's been a few months since Linda left, and honestly, the silence that followed her departure was both a relief and a strange emptiness. Tom and I spent those weeks focusing on each other, on our relationship. No more toxic interference, no more emotional manipulation. It felt like we were finally breathing, like we had air in our lungs again. But even though Linda was out of the picture, the ripple effects still lingered. Tom had spent so many years questioning himself, doubting his decisions because of her. And while I could see the burden lifting, I also saw the scars it left. He wasn't the same person he had been when I first met him, not completely. But that didn't mean he was broken. He was stronger now, more sure of who he was, and more clear about what he wanted in life. We talked a lot during those months. About everything. About our future, about the things we wanted to build together. There were moments when I'd catch Tom staring off into space, and I knew he was thinking about everything that had happened. I'd ask him if he was okay, and he'd smile, but I could tell it wasn't a smile that reached his eyes, not yet. "Do you think I did the right thing?" he asked me one night, while we were sitting on the couch, the TV on in the background but no one really watching. I turned toward him, running my fingers through his hair. "I do," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You did what was best for us, Tom. You've been living in her shadow for too long. It was time to step out from under it. I'm proud of you." He leaned in, kissing me gently on the forehead. "I'm glad you're with me through all this. I don't think I could have done it alone." And I knew that was the truth. I had been there with him through the worst of it, and together, we'd come out the other side. The damage wasn't gone, it never would be completely gone. But it was healing. Slowly, but surely. As for Linda, we haven't heard from her since that day she stormed off our porch. I don't know what's going on in her life, and honestly, I don't care anymore. She had her chance to be a mother, and she chose to make it all about her. She didn't get to decide our future. As for Tom, well, he's not the same person he was when I met him. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think he's finally the person he was meant to be, without all that baggage holding him back. He's happier. He's more present. And he's mine. Now, I don't know if our story is over or if this is just another chapter. Maybe we'll face more challenges down the line. Maybe things will get harder before they get better. But one thing's for sure, whatever happens, we've got each other's backs. We've learned what we're made of, and we're not afraid to fight for what we've got. So, if anyone out there is going through something like this, whether it's a toxic mother-in-law or just a family that doesn't understand or respect your boundaries, know this: you are not alone. You have the right to stand up for yourself. You have the right to protect your peace, your relationship, and your mental health. And sometimes, walking away is the only way to truly move forward. It's not easy, and it won't always feel like the right choice, but trust me, it is. You're worth it. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone in a similar situation, it would be this: don't let anyone, no matter how close they are to you, make you feel like you're not worthy of happiness. You deserve peace. You deserve respect. And you deserve to love and be loved without anyone pulling the strings behind the scenes. So take control of your own story. Don't let anyone else write it for you. You've got this.